Welcome to this installment of Figuring It Out. Today we have a special guest, Alex, who works in the healthcare industry. And we're going to also include one of our managing partners, Ron Schlecht, because why not? But we figured with all the
I
ransomware,
enjoy the healthcare industry.
yeah, well, I mean, you might do some things sometimes with respect to healthcare, right? So, the last week or so, there's been a ton of ransomware attacks targeting the healthcare space. And that's what really prompted us thinking about it. And I've known Alex for a long time. I naturally thought of him, and he has a unique perspective. And I figured getting him involved will give us more than just that kind of consultant perspective that Ron and I have working with the healthcare organizations that we do. So maybe I'll open with that, Alex. We see ransomware hit all the time. Last week, it came to a head because it was so many in such a short time frame, but that's not new. We've been hearing about ransomware and malware in the healthcare space, really in every space, but healthcare seems to get particularly crippled by it when it happens. And I think in some of our prior chats, you had, I think a bit of an interesting and different take on that and why.
Yeah, healthcare as an industry is unique. It's one of the only places where if somebody comes up in front of your front doors and throws a person out of the car who's beaten and unconscious and bloody, we don't lock the doors. We run out, get them, and we bring them in, and we patch them up. So that culture of openness doesn't just exist for the quality of care; it also exists on the network. So our providers want open networks, and in a critical care situation, the last thing you can say to somebody is, I need you to put a service order in for that. And then that will get routed to me. And then after it gets routed to me, I'll prioritize it. And they're like, yeah, this person has 2 minutes to live. You don't get that time. So they've pre-built some of that openness into healthcare where the least privilege concept doesn't exist. Least privilege has an expanded meaning there. It's pretty much you get everything you want and say you need, planning for the future.
Right.
And that was persistent in healthcare long ago before EMRs. And it's still pervasive today, and that's setting the foundation for a lot of the problems we have in healthcare.
Yeah, and I think we as consultants, we can see that, we can say that, we can give them examples, we can cite that, but until that culture changes at the very top, which it's one of the few instances that it's an understandable culture. To me, an analog is higher education and education in general, but higher education specifically is a somewhat close analog to a lot of healthcare providers, especially because a lot of higher education, or at least some higher education, often has their own either pseudo healthcare like clinics and whatnot on campus, or they might be, delivering schooling on healthcare. And we see the same kind of concept of openness because of the history of education, especially in America, where there's free exchange and open ideas. And it's the same kind of elements and concepts at play where people just want information and access because they believe it's the right thing to do, right? And the flip side of that is the bad guys don't care that you're trying to do good things. They are just trying to get what they're trying to get, and they're going to stomp on you all along the way.
Yeah.
Good.
And we've become an easier target because in the last few years, the healthcare industry's seen a lot of consolidation. So your small community-based hospital is now generally part of a larger system. You're not one hospital anymore, you're 5 or 10. So you have fewer options in the community for hospitals.
Right.
And for an attacker's point, like, hey, this is great. I don't just have to affect one community. If I ransomware 10 communities, they're gonna pay me. They have to be open because in a lot of places, outside a major city, you might have one healthcare provider in the area, maybe two, but it's usually a small one and then a large one. If you hit the large one, yeah, it puts a hurt on the community.
Yeah. And I think we were connecting some of the continued struggles, yeah, it's the philosophy, but it's also the way a lot of folks just view what information security is. And it's something that, when I was doing assessments and penetration tests and everything myself, we heard people say this, and we've rallied against it for years, that compliance is not security. So while the HIPAA security rule and the data breach rule and the privacy rule, they've done a lot for consumers. I actually would make the case that in some ways they've harmed consumers because they've set a relatively low bar that healthcare organizations can just point to and say, well, we did those things, so we're good now, right? And you see that play out in other industries too, be it PCI, which isn't necessarily a specific industry regulation, but you get the point that people will kind of just try to clear that lowest bar. They won't try to build a strong program. They'll just try to be compliant.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. When I started in healthcare, I experienced that firsthand. Is most of our department's work was compliance focused, and when you had the omnibus ruling of 2013 and the risk of harm went away, we spend a lot of time deeming a breach because we have a patient who comes in and says at registration at the like urgent care, they say who's your primary care doctor, and they say Dr. Smith, and the person registering them picks the first Dr. Smith in the list or picks a Dr. Smith that this person hasn't seen in 10 years. And they say, do you want us to send a copy of whatever occurs today to Dr. Smith? Yeah, sure, go ahead. Well, Dr. Smith gets it, says, yeah, this isn't a patient of mine. That's now deemed a breach. We spend a significant amount of resources chasing that down, trying to rectify it when there really isn't any harm. Dr. Smith looks at it and says, yeah, no, this isn't my patient. Put it in the shredder. We're done. But the federal government now says that's a breach. You need to notify the patient. So we are practicing that security compliance or compliance security, where we're going through a regulation and saying we have to check these boxes, even though we have many places where HIPAA is in direct conflict with NIST. And I don't think if you were outside of healthcare, you would look at HIPAA and say, this is a model we should follow for our industry. This is going to make us more secure. This is going to thwart attacks. It doesn't occur.
Yeah.
And we struggle with that. Now, we are starting to see some of that change as our more compliance focused CISOs kind of cycle out, because at first that's who came into securities. These were compliance folks. And now we're seeing some more technical CISOs come in to those roles, and security's getting kind of more attention, but there's still a lot of catch up to do to other industries.
Yeah, you read my mind, because I was going to ask you, like, why do you think there's seems to be, and things are clearly still not perfect, but I think I've noticed that shift too, where you have CMOs and CMIOs, right? Chief medical officers, chief medical information officers, along with the traditional CIO role, that are like paying more attention to this stuff.
Yeah, they certainly are. And I think Hollywood healthcare a few years ago really got everyone's attention. And people looked at this and said, wow, this couldn't happen to us. This would be bad. And then they came to us and said, could this happen to us? And we're like, absolutely, it can happen to us.
Yeah.
Like, it totally can. Okay. And then we got some wind in our sails, and we were able to make some great leaps. So the open environment that the providers always had now has been clamped down to. It's open to do your job. It's not open to do things that are beyond the scope of your job. So we got some of that wind. We were able to make some strides. And then in this last week, of course, it's really picked up when the FBI is having calls with hospitals, letting them know what they're seeing, and that although they're not a specific target, but the industry as a whole is, it has a lot of people worried, because as they read on Becker's Healthcare and others sites, they start to realize that breaches now put their jobs in risk, that this is really serious. I can't do this.
Yeah, I think back to, you reminded me of a personal example. It's a quick aside, but I think it's kind of a funny story, so it's worth sharing. So years ago, I had reconstructive knee surgery, and beforehand, the doctor had said, like, oh yeah, after your surgery, as soon as you come in your first appointment, we'll be able to show you your knee surgery with pictures and everything. Awesome. And this is years ago. So I remember sitting in the office after my surgery, and I always joke and say, like, they send in like the junior doctor first, because that always seemed to be what happened, right? I had my surgeon, who was the tier 1 high-end guy, and then they would always send in the other guys first. And so I'm dealing with the younger surgeon in training, or whatever that the right term is. So he sets up my chart on the screen, and he's clearly this is right after surgery, right? Had surgery on a Friday. This is like Tuesday afterwards. So I'm in like the full leg brace and everything. So he pulls up my chart with the pictures and everything, and he goes and he starts explaining it to me, like showing me things. He goes, wait, what? You sure it's your right knee? And I like look down. He's like, well, this is a left knee. And I'm like, well, that ain't me. He's like, it's all the same anyway. And just because I'm like, yeah, what am I going to know? Like, I don't know what a knee looks like from the inside. It was just one of those moments where you're like, well, that's a HIPAA violation right there. But yeah, I don't even know who it was.
Yeah. But speaking of that, the imaging capability is what the ability to look inside the human body without cutting it open is what separates first world medicine from third world medicine. Sure. And we have plenty of imaging in our facilities. Like, they're running 24 hours a day. They generate a lot of revenue. They can never go down, because the alternative to them going down is we have to cut into somebody to look. Whereas with your knee, they could take pictures of it, and with modern 3D with modern 3D imaging and then 3D printing, they have the ability to print your knee from an image and then perform the surgery on that printed knee before they ever go into your body, so that they can rehearse it. Like, there's some really cool stuff that we get to see and do, but the challenge is securing these things.
Yeah. I didn't get that, but Ron, you were jumping in there.
No, I just wanted to jump in because it's so funny. We always think of security and sort of like breaches as always like this, hooded attacker, adversarial type breach, right? And in healthcare, breaches can be so many more different things, as you were kind of talking about, Alex, which was like, just sending information or somebody having the wrong information is considered a breach. And I always kind of go back to one of the things that we hear from our healthcare clients, which is, with meaningful use being a term that is thrown around a lot, right? It made it even more critical to really figure out who should be and how care can be viewed from multiple different providers. And I have to imagine, because it's one of the biggest areas that I think people struggle with outside of healthcare, is identity and access management, and the whole way up to who has rights, who's authorized to be doing certain things. But in healthcare, it goes from like this big of a problem to like, the size of the room type problem, because of meaningful use and how that information can be transferred and who's allowed to see it. So I have to think that that's one thing that gives you particular headaches on a regular basis.
Yeah, and the number of applications we have is massive. When you look at like our line of business and what we sell, healthcare isn't just like healthcare. We have emergency medicine, we have pediatrics, we have oncology, we have bariatrics and diabetes and preventative care, and each one of those all have their own separate systems. So a full service health system ends up with hundreds of applications, some of which come from vendors who might be the only player in the market. And it's a big challenge.
Years, right? Might have been for 30 years, and therefore don't have much motivation to modernize or, build in those kind of, and I wouldn't even call them modern. I would call them just basic access controls, right? They might require local admin on a system or something like that, right?
Oh yeah. And you ask about Active Directory Federation or Azure Active Directory, and they're like, yeah, we're thinking of maybe doing that in the next release in a couple years. Like, wow. Like I can't provision 3,000 users in your system and keep it managed. Like, that's really hard to do.
I had an interesting conversation with an organization years ago in another life in the Midwest when I was doing the assessment, and they were a radiation oncology center that served two competing hospitals in a kind of metropolitan area. And, they were relatively small. And I remember meeting with their IT team, and they were having frustrations with when we pulled, we do our typical like assessor thing, right? Like we say, give us a dump of privileges, privileged accounts on each system and who has knowledge of the password, right? So do that kind of thing. And this was a Unix box that was their, I'm going to use the wrong term, but I'll call it laser knife, right? It was, remember, radiation oncology. So this is, I guess, destroying cancer cells in people's brains is the dummy understanding that I got. And I remember chatting with the woman who was in charge of IT, and she's like, yeah, like I don't have, like the root password to this box is like very simple. And I'm not allowed to change it. I'm like, well, that's silly. You're the director of IT. Why not? She's like, because the chief physicist says that that's what he wants it to be. And that's his system. And I'm like, I'm like, so have you had this discussion? She's like, yeah, the chief physicist says, every time we try to get him to change, it's a patient care issue. And I said, well, I don't have a wand, but what I do have is you won't have any patients to deliver care to if an attacker guesses this very simple password, gets in and causes harm to someone or exposes data. Like data exposure there is the not so bad scenario. This could actually hurt somebody if they could change treatment plans to, that kind of system. So she's like, I never thought of it that way. And then, we didn't, again, solve it in one day, but it was put him on the path to resolving it. But it just shows you the mentality in healthcare where that chief physicist wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't trying to harm anybody. He just wanted to do what he was comfortable with, right? That legacy behavior carried over.
Yeah, and we found worse with vendors. We found contractual language obligating us to keep passwords the default because the vendor
Yeah.
has said it's too hard for us to support all these hospitals with different passwords, and it's widely known. It's easily published out there. Anybody can look it up and see what it is and get access to these systems once on your network. And that's a
Getting
real
the
struggle.
vending machine key, right? There's like one
Yeah,
key for
yeah,
all vending machines in the
yep.
world. That's a secret, by the way. A little pro tip. You can go out there and 3D print
That's
your
a fat guy tip right there.
own. Hey, what are you trying to say, man?
Yeah. Listen, you're reformed. I get it. It's cool. That's insane. That is absolutely insane. So one of the other things that we didn't touch on, we talk about struggles in all these different areas like compliance and then, just sort of organizationally or really culturally what, most healthcare systems focus on. And then some very specific things like meaningful use and, a couple different examples. But then, throw in there a worldwide pandemic where all of the rules change. What have you seen? Everybody's changed sort of the modality of what their workplace looks like now. How has that been a factor in sort of healthcare cybersecurity?
Alex's is an office in Europe, judging by the wall plate there in the
My
background.
plug over here.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's we had like a rapid evacuation of our offices on March 12th. That was in the state here. That was the day most kids were told you're not coming back to school, and we don't know when. And employees just kind of said we're not coming back in. So we really had two groups of employees. We had those who provided care to patients who were on site, and then we had all these administrative functions who were at home. And at one point, I think we might have had close to 5,000 people off site, and not many of them have come back on site. So our perimeter has greatly moved, but our perimeter for the treatment of care has also moved as well, because as we started closing down facilities because the state said you can't do certain things, you can't see certain patients, we moved to telemedicine, and the relaxing of the regulations meant we went from doing virtually no telemedicine visits to doing like 10,000 in a 3-day period. It was just a crazy number. And the patients were overwhelmingly happy with it. They said, look, I don't need to come in. My doctor still gets to see me. But it also opened up the door that our doctors, many of them for those primary care, the primary care offices, they don't always need to live near your facility anymore. So it opens up this whole world. We hear about, the looming doctor shortage. We've got this rising aging population. We've got fewer people going into medicine. Well, what if you're a physician and you say, hey, look, I have a place down in the villages in Florida and I don't really fully want to retire. I still want to practice medicine a little. You can do that now. So you can maybe do 2-3 days a week if you want, 4 hours a day. You can still practice medicine, do primary care visits via video, and then you have your rest of your day free. So it's opened up so many possibilities for us.
Yeah, we've seen that on the consumer side. I saw that because right around the start of this thing, I mean, I'm an outdoorsy kind of guy anyway, and my family is, but we do a little family bike ride, and my 7-year-old decides to cut in front of my wife on the bike. So they both eat it. And my wife ends up fracturing her wrist and spraining her elbow. So we telemedicined it for a little bit. And we clearly were working with a group that this was all new to. And I'm sure you had some of the same, right? There's some kinks that got to get figured out. There's probably some data security concerns that you had. I'm not, I'll be careful because I don't want to put you on the spot on commenting how strong you feel, but maybe you can speak generally about how you feel that transition to telemedicine has been from a security respect.
I don't think it's been too bad. The relaxing of the regulations by the federal government and the state meant that products that we previously couldn't use, which were consumer grade, that consumers were very, very familiar with, we now could use.
Like a Zoom, right? Like that kind
Correct. Even WhatsApp, like very popular.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
But you have that ability, so you don't need this special system for it. But the floodgates that have opened now is vendors are realizing that medicine's no longer going to be confined to the building, and the ability to keep people home and still provide treatment is a lucrative market for vendors. So right now, every vendor who has a wearable or something that attaches to a phone via Bluetooth, be it a scale, a glucose meter, they're rushing to get their products into hospitals, and they're selling to physicians. They're not selling to security people. So we often don't even get to talk to them because they want to make a sale as quick as possible. And then later they'll figure security out. And we're finding some real gems when we do the intake of these products, and we do actually get to start asking questions. And it's surprising some of the stuff we hear. So those are the concerns going forward for
Right.
us.
Yeah, and just lump that into the whole IoT bucket in general,
Mhm.
right? Like you've been dealing with that in a healthcare setting for many years already, right? Nurses stations that had a million different widgets. You always had some interesting like telemetry systems that were wireless in the in a hospital setting or whatever. So yeah, that you had that already, and now it's just going to be amplified. So good luck on that.
It's amplified. It's moved outside the building. Oh, and we've put it all in the cloud too.
Right.
The industry that was most resistant to the cloud now has suddenly gone like full on cloud.
Embraced it. Yeah.
How fast can we shut data centers down?
Seriously. Well, I don't know, Ron, did you have anything else we should hit on today? Because
I think we hit the entire spectrum of potential issues.
We talked COVID, which that was a good thought. Shame on me for not even thinking it, but Alex, that was.
But you got vending machines in there, so
hey, I'm really good. I'm awesome. If you didn't have phones, like in like 2003, I was a fantastic like friend to have at a bar for Quizzo night. I'm like got all kinds of random facts up here.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's go to vending machines quickly, because it brings up the other thing is independent of healthcare. We're still a business that we service tens of thousands of people a day. We have buildings where thousands work in. So we do have all these other things that come in. We have the vending machines now that they want internet connectivity so they can monitor inventory and then alarm when somebody needs to come so they can reduce the visits to those.
Sure.
We have vending machines for facilities and maintenance. We have third-party providers who are in our hospitals that want their own time clocks, want their own systems on, and they want to bring them on our network, or at least that's what they try and tell us.
Sure.
So these are all these other concerns we have of things that try and walk in the door, and our network is not built or designed for them. It's built for healthcare and treatment.
Right. And now you've had to kind of reconfigure. So add that into the mix of complexities, and, complexity is the enemy of security, right? I mean, just in general. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Alex, I appreciate you taking the time. It was really good to connect on this. I think our audience got some good insight there. We're going to be doing this again in another week or two. We'll have another session coming up. We'll have another special guest. But for the moment, I think we figured out some challenges in healthcare. So Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Please, everyone, have a great day and be well.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you.